You've seen stories about judges who hand out embarrassing punishments instead of jail sentences to some offenders. Well, it's more common than ever these days, and even parents of misbehaving children, they're having their kids stand in public for things like stealing or sneaking out late. The question is, does this work? We're going to ask that question of child and adolescent psychologist Dr. Jen Hartstein and CBS This Morning contributor Lee Woodruff. Good morning to both of you. Always great to see both of you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Dr. Jen, does it work?
No, it doesn't. I mean, that's the short answer. I think that we think that it's going to work because we're really creating humiliation and embarrassment for these kids, teenagers, adults. But the fact is we're not really actually having them reflect on their behavior. We're not actually having them think about what they could do instead. Instead, we're just putting them out there and humiliating them, which is going to have long-term emotional consequences for them down the road. That's more problematic to me than it is figuring out what the punishment should be to fit the crime.
So it actually has a negative effect.
It can absolutely have a negative effect and really impact how they view life later.
This is also such a brittle time in their psyches. In kids, they're developing who they are, and so to be humiliated, I feel like there needs to be a line. We're all trying to be too much friends to our children, so there need to be consequences, and there need to be maybe positive reinforcements, but humiliation, no.
What point, Lee, do you think parents have to be at to go down this path in the first place?
I think that you probably have to be at your wit's end at some point, but we were talking earlier, in some ways, it's exactly what we're trying to teach them about Facebook. Don't put everything out there. Don't make everything so public. So now to do this is almost like, don't do what I say, do what I do.
It's interesting because sometimes I know I appeal to my kids by saying, you know what, you've put me in an embarrassing position. And I actually find that's effective with them because they understand embarrassment and don't like it. So if you're doing this to them, if you're embarrassing them, I can see how it could reinforce some negative
Right,
things.
and what it does is it promotes this sense of guilt and shame. If I'm doing something that's going to impact you, I feel guilty about that because I don't want to disappoint my dad. I don't want to disappoint people that matter to me. If I'm doing something that only impacts me, I'm going to feel shame, which is an incredibly powerful and debilitating emotion. So what we're really doing is we're humiliating these kids. We're putting them out there for everybody to point and laugh at them, which is just kind of a different form of bullying in some way, right? We're just putting them down, putting them down. And we put all these placards and all these things online for people to see. Now the world is humiliating them.
In the green room, I just had a discussion, you weren't there, and one of the women was shamed and made to wear a dunce cap after failing a French test, and the rest of the class did as well. She'd wanted to act and sing, never would get on a stage after that. It was so now that's damaging.
Right.
So you're taking someone and you're really truncating their goals.
So Jen, what do parents do? I mean, let's say your child really does something like steals from a store. You're with them in the store, they happen to walk out with something. What does a parent do in response to that?
Well, there's some really simple things. If they stole, little kids do this all the time. It's important to then go overextend it, take them back in. They have to return it. They have to apologize, and they have to say, I'm going to pay for this. So parents have to think about how the punishment fits the crime. So it has to be a meaningful punishment. It has to be effective. It has to be time limited. And the meaningful part of it has to be to the kid, not to you. And you also have to make your expectations very clear. What do you want them to do? How do you want them to act? And what's going to happen?
And I also, Anthony, you and I are in the same town. There was a hazing incident in our town, and everybody knew who these kids were.
Right.
Their names weren't initially published, but that shame in itself was the punishment.
Right.
You don't need to go another step forward.
Right.
Natural consequences are very powerful.
But sometimes parents do get in a position you've tried, 20 things and it's not working. And you reach a point where you feel like you got to do something. And the psychology here, I know, is if you shame them, they'll remember this, they won't do it. But as it turns out, sometimes they remember it for way too long.
Absolutely.
Right.
There needs to be punishment. Punishment, has to happen at times. Consequences are effective. And it doesn't teach something new. So the double-edged sword here is how are you going to punish and teach at the same time?
Right.
So you need to figure out how to be able to do both. And sometimes that might be saying you have to do community service for X amount of time and give back to make up for it.
Make it positive.
I like to end on that note. Lee Woodruff, Dr. Jen Hartstein. Let's just make it all positive on Saturday.
Positive punishment for Saturday morning.
Thanks, ladies.
Thanks.